Taping this lecture, and I want to thank TorahAnyTime for all the work that it does in spreading Torah throughout the world. I was just speaking to a friend of mine today from Israel and told me that he watches TorahAnyTime lectures many times in his house in Beit Shemesh. So we see that the world is watching lectures that we're producing here. We're watching lectures in Israel. It's a wonderful thing that TorahAnyTime is doing. Anything we do to help is a tremendous mitzvah. Number two, that we should know that TorahAnyTime asked me to say that Saturday night at 10 p.m. we're having a video for Rabbi Wallerstein. Rabbi Wallerstein gave a wonderful speech Tuesday night. 10 o'clock you get hot pizza, followed by a presentation from Rabbi Wallerstein. So you have a great Motzi Shabbat. Doesn't get better than that. Tonight's lecture is a lecture in honor of Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust. The day we know we have Yom HaShoah was Monday night, Tuesday, a day designated to commemorate the Kedoshim, the holy Jews who died in the Holocaust. So we're dedicating tonight's lecture in, of course, the memory of all Kedoshim, the 6 million who died as Kiddush Hashem. And we hope the words that we say tonight of inspiration will be in Aliyah for the neshamas of all those Jews who perished. It's a difficult topic to talk about the Holocaust. And I do it with a lot of fear, a lot of trepidation, because when we're talking about the death of 6 million Jews, it's not 6 million out of 18 million, or 6 million out of 12 million. It's 6 million out of 6 million. Each Jew was a world by himself. Each human being is a world. Olam bifnei atzmo. And 6 million, the number, we can't even imagine that number. And it's not just a death, it's a death over and over and over again, a type of torture and suffering. And to talk about it and try to understand it is a very difficult thing to do. However, I feel that as we sit over 60 years away from the event, I feel very strongly that we have an obligation to try to understand it. And you and I have the luxury of not having experienced it firsthand, and therefore we have the opportunity to have clarity and to try to understand it with our brains and not be overwhelmed with our hearts. So I think our job tonight is to try to grasp a little bit what was God's purpose in bringing about the Holocaust, why there was such a decree on the Jewish people, and what we're supposed to learn from it. And again, I just emphasize that I'm saying this with a lot of fear and a lot of trepidation. Because when I say that, what was God's role in the Holocaust, I'm saying what I mean. That God didn't forget about us. God didn't abandon us. God knew what was happening. And God allowed it to happen. And brought it. And if He brought it, it means there's a meaning that comes from the Almighty. And if it comes from the Almighty, it has to be based on love. And to try to grasp what the meaning can be, it's a very difficult thing to do. But I'm going to make an attempt to do that tonight. And I apologize in advance if I don't succeed. But I'm going to ask you to bear with me and help me along with this, and give me the benefit of the doubt that God does have a plan and a purpose, and it's a purpose of love. And hopefully we'll be able to understand or get a glimpse of it, if so slightly. That's all we can do. So I don't know what qualifications I really have to speak about this, to be honest with you. My only qualification, I feel, is that as a Jew, I have to come to terms with it. I have to understand it. The only way we can really give meaning and honor to those who perished is to try to understand what happened and why it happened. To look at it as some just, freak accident of nature, freak historical event, I think is a disservice to those who perished. So I have no qualifications to speak other than, just like you, I have to come to terms with it and understand it. I feel connected to it very strongly. My father came from Germany in 1938. He calls himself a Holocaust evader. He just missed the Holocaust. He came in 38 because as Hitler came to power in 33, And when his father was placed in jail a number of times in Germany, the family knew to leave. So I'm alive today because of the foresight of my grandfather to get the family out of Germany in 1938. My father-in-law, Chazan Alex Lenz, Shavafua Shlema, he went through Auschwitz, he went through Mauthausen. He was liberated by the Germans, by the Americans in 1945 from Mauthausen. That was in Austria. And he went through the experience. And the fact that he survived with his mother, but his father was murdered by the Nazis, and his brother was murdered by the Nazis. The fact that he survived is the reason my wife is here and why our children are here. So I feel very grateful that my family was part of the group that was able to survive and to be rescued and to get out. And perhaps that's why I feel an obligation also to, again, try to pursue meaning and understanding in it. I had only a little bit of an exposure to it when in college in 1982. I went back to Germany and I went to the house where my father was born, where my father lived till 1938, and I knocked on the door of the house and I introduced myself and I said in German, I said, "Ich bin die Enkel from Ludwig Krautkopf." I said, "I'm the grandson of Ludwig Krautkopf." That's my grandfather. And the woman, I remember to this day her face, she was the daughter of the man who bought it for my grandfather in 1938. And she looked at me, and I remember to this day she looked at me and she gasped. And she said, "I thought you were all dead." And I remember the feeling that I had, no, we're not dead. And we're still here. I think she was concerned that I wanted to reclaim the house. But I remember I came into the house and they were very gracious to me, and I sat down and she showed me certain things that belonged to my grandmother, my great-grandmother. We bought the house with these curtains, we bought the house with the stove was there, and I remember I took pictures, I talked with them. But that was already 1982, and I don't even know if they're still alive. We keep moving further and further away from the events, and you could find so many people who want to deny it, say it didn't happen. It was all a Jewish conspiracy, a lie to arouse world sympathy, to gain the state of Israel. So we see there are those who are lying about it right now. But that aside, our mission tonight, and where my heart needs to take us, is to understand really what's the purpose of it. Why did it happen? What was God's plan for it? And believe me, anything I'm going to say, I cannot speak for God, but I'm going to try to understand it based on sources in the Torah and based on statements of our great sages. First of all, to understand this type of suffering of the Jewish people, we have to go back to the first time where there was national anti-Semitism. Where was the root, as it were, of suffering that the nation experienced? To do that, we have to go back to Egypt. We have to go back to Mitzrayim. Egypt was the first time we as a nation experienced this type of what we call, let's call it national anti-Semitism, slavery. We were enslaved. Now, it's very interesting. I'm just going to read to you from the Torah. And the Torah says at the end of Parshas Vayigash, it says as follows. The end of Parshas Vayigash, what happens is the Jewish people come down to Egypt. Yosef's already now, we know, the viceroy, and he brings down Yaakov and the sons, and Yaakov now is there for 17 years. And it says, V'yeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen. The Jewish people dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen. It's very interesting, by the way, when Yaakov and his sons come to Egypt, the first thing that first thing that Yosef says to Yaakov is, I want you to go to Goshen. Even before Yaakov has a chance to settle into his hotel, or get ready for the night, first thing Yosef says is, you have to stay away from the Egyptians. Go to Goshen. Then he brings a number of the brothers before Pharaoh, and he says to them, these are my brothers. And Pharaoh says, what's your profession? And he says that they are sheep herders. Now why do we have to know that detail that he tells Pharaoh that they're sheep herders? The reason is because the Egyptians used to worship the sheep. So Yosef's telling Pharaoh, these people actually herd and control your God. Now, how do you think Pharaoh felt about that? I don't think so good. But I think that was Yosef's plan. Pharaoh wants to say, listen, keep these people as far away from me as you can. Because, if they herd sheep, they're hurting my God. Keep them away. So Yosef's plan was to separate the Jewish people from the Egyptians. Then it says, V'yeshiv Yisrael b'eretz Mitzrayim b'eretz Goshen, and Israel dwelt there. V'yachazu ba, and it says they began to take possession of the land. V'yifru v'yirbu miod, and they increased and they multiplied. Then at the beginning of the next parsha, which is Parshas Vayechi, it opens up in a very interesting way. It opens up by saying Vayechi, and this is the life. Vayechi Yaakov b'eretz Mitzrayim sheva esra shana. Yaakov dwelt in the land of Egypt 17 years. When Yaakov came down, he was there 17 years. He was 147 when he died. The reason I bring this is because in the Torah, if you ever look at a Torah scroll, you'll notice that there are spaces between each parsha. It's always a 9-letter space, except for one exception. Between the end of Parshas Vayigash, which talks about the Jewish people coming down and settling in Goshen, and the death of Jacob, there's no space between the parsha. It's closed, so to speak, no space. And the rabbis say that the reason there's a space is because it allows you to think. You have time to think about what you just said. And they say the reason the space is closed is for a very specific reason. It's because when Yaakov died, Rashi says, the Fisha Kiman Shenifter Yaakov Avinu Nistamu Einayim Belibam Shel Yisrael Mitzaras Hashibud. Their eyes and their hearts became sealed to the realization that the slavery was beginning. So what Hashem does is he puts one parsha right next to the other parsha like this, in order to show you with your eye that something was closed, something was sealed. And our rabbis tell us what was sealed. The hearts of the Jewish people were sealed to the beginning of the slavery. They didn't see it coming in Egypt. Now, I'm just going to do a little bit of math with you and think with me through this. How old was Yosef when he went down to Egypt? He was 17. How many years was he in Egypt till Jacob came down? 22. That means he was 39 when Jacob came down. Jacob was in Egypt, it says at the beginning of Parashas Vayechi, 17 years. So how old was Joseph when Jacob died? 39 plus 17 is 50, 56. Yosef died at the age of 110. He lived another 54 years. He was the first of all of the brothers to die. The last was Levi, who died somewhat years after Yosef. Let's assume he died approximately 40 years after Yosef, because each brother died within 5-6 years of each other. Let's say Levi, the last one, died 40 years after Joseph. We have a tradition that when did the slavery begin? The slavery began at the death of the last brother, Levi. That's to say, after Yaakov died, the slavery began 94 years later. 94 years later. So why does Rashi tell me, and why do our commentators tell us, the reason God puts one parsha right next to the other parsha is to say that at the death of Jacob, the hearts and the eyes of Israel were sealed off to the beginning of the slavery. As if to say they couldn't see, like they're sealed, they're closed. But when did the slavery begin? The slavery began 94 years later. So what's God telling us? That the slavery began when Jacob died. Do you know what it's telling us? Listen carefully. It's saying the reason the slavery began because of the way in which the Jewish people were conducting themselves in Egypt. How are they conducting themselves in Egypt? The last verse teaches us. It says, "Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim," and Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, be'eretz Goshen, v'ya'achazu ba, and they began to take possession of the land. The Kli Yakar reads it, the land began to take possession of them. Let me ask you a question. If you feel that you are a refugee, if you feel that you are in exile, if you feel this is not your land, what do you do with your money? Do you keep your money in diamonds and gold, things that you can trade and be ready to run with? Or do you buy real estate? What do you do?
If it's not yours?
If you feel that you have to leave America tomorrow, or you're going to have to leave Russia tomorrow, or leave Uzbekistan tomorrow, or leave Germany tomorrow, where do you put your money? Do you put your money into diamond and gold, things you put in your pocket and your shoes? Or do you buy condominiums in Palm Springs? You know what the verse says? They dwelt in the land of Goshen. V'ya'achazu ba. Rashi says the word is lashon achiza, they acquired. They took acquisition, possession of the land. And it says the land took possession of them even. They started buying real estate. They started buying up Egypt. They started feeling very comfortable to be in Egypt. They started to feel, this is our home, let's be like the Egyptian. And it's very interesting. You know, we all know that it says that in the merit of 3 things we were redeemed. We didn't change our language, we didn't change our names, we went by Reuben and Shimon and Levi and Sarah and Rivka and Rachel. We didn't change our language, we spoke Hebrew. But Rabbi Wasserman, one of the great Rosh Hashivas, who died actually in the Holocaust, he says, no, that's not what the Medrash means. It means as we began to become more like the Egyptian, the slavery intensified. As we pretended we were Egyptian, as we began to assimilate and be more Egyptian, the slavery got worse and worse, and the rabbis in Egypt said, if it's getting worse, it can only be for one reason, because we're forgetting who we are. Don't change your names. You're no longer Achman and Fatah and Muhammad. You're now Reuben and Shimon and Levi and Sarah and Rivka and Rachel. We're not going to speak Egyptian anymore. We're going to speak Lashon HaKodesh, Hebrew. We're going to start wearing Jewish dress again. What's Jewish dress? Modest. Clean as possible. Elegant as possible. It's Jewish dress. We have dignity. We're Jews. They understood that as slavery intensifies, it's for one reason. Because we're becoming more and more like the host culture. We're becoming more like the Egyptians. What the Torah teaches us is the more we lose sight of who we are as Jews, the greater will be anti-Semitism. The greater will be persecution. And that's what happened in Egypt. We knew that there had to be a slavery. We knew that from Avram Avinu. But the reason it got so bad was because we became so close to the Egyptian. And I'll tell you something very interesting. David HaMelech tells us in Psalm 105, David HaMelech praises the Almighty for all that He did in taking us out of Egypt. Right? You slew their gods, and you slew their firstborn, and there was the plague of the blood, and the frogs, and the lice. All he praises God so beautifully. And then right in the middle of the psalm, you know what he says? And God, thank you for causing the Egyptians to hate us. Thank you, God, for causing the Egyptians to hate us? Why is that a praise of God? Well, you know why it's a praise of God? Because the Brisker Rav teaches us that in Egypt, we knew there would be a slavery. But we thought the best way to deal with the slavery is, well, let's be friendly. Let's get along with the Egyptians. Let's get to know them. Let's hang out in their clubs, Let's be like them. So you know what they did? They did Brit Milah. Brit Milah is very important. They did Brit Milah. But after they did the Brit Milah, they did some sort of other operation to make it look like they didn't have Brit Milah. So they could go to the clubs and go to the spas and go to the swimming places. We could fit in. So right there, you know what God does? God changed the heart of the Egyptian to hate them. And David HaMelech, writing in Psalm 105, says, God, thank you for causing the Egyptians to hate them. Because if they didn't hate us, we would never have found what it means to be a Jew. We would have become like them. Now I'll tell you something, my friends. It's so important that we remember that we are Jews. You know why? Because the world depends on you and the world depends on me. God created the world in a way that He wants to give His light Himself to everyone, to the whole world. But He can't do it because the world went after all sorts of idols and nonsense and selfishness and materialism. So He chose one nation, the Jewish nation, the children of Avraham, children of Yitzchak, of Yaakov, that's us. And our job is to be a light in Or Lagola, a light to the nations. We have to be different, we have to be holy, we have to live differently, we have to live a completely different life, and thereby reflect God to the world. That's your job and that's my job. And guess what? If we give up this job, there's no purpose for the world. We are so unique and so different. And if we're going to become like the Egyptians, the whole purpose of creation is gone. So God puts in the hearts of the Egyptians to hate us even more as we gave up, as we wanted to change our Brit Milah and look more like them. Because the Jewish people, we're so different. So different. Our rabbis tell us that even the way we farm is different. Did you know, for example, you can't put an ox and a donkey together on the same plow? You know why? Many reasons, but I'll tell you a beautiful reason. Because the ox chews its food over and over and over again. It's a ruminant. It has many stomachs. The donkey does not. It only has one stomach. That means the ox enjoys its food 5 times as much as the donkey. And the donkey is going to look over, and you see the ox chewing. And the donkey's going to feel bad. Why is he eating and I'm not eating? You know what God says? Be so sensitive that you can't put a donkey together with the ox. Even the way we plow our field is to gain sensitivities. That's what a Jew is. I remember I saw a story that in one of the transports from Hungary to Auschwitz, so you've seen those cattle cars where they had put 200 Jews in a cattle car. You saw those in the museum, the Holocaust museum. They crowded into this cattle car, and all of a sudden this Jew yells out to his friend who's not yet on the transport, and he says, "Remember the chickens! I forgot to feed the chickens." You know, the Germans are bringing Jews to slaughter, and there's a Jew in this cattle car worried about his chickens. We're a different nation. We're different people. And we have to be different because the world depends on us. And if we give up that job, there's no purpose for creation. You hear that? So as we became more Egyptian-like, the persecution intensified. And our rabbis knew, they understood that. Okay, keep Jewish names, keep Jewish dress, keep Jewish speech, Hebrew. That's the only way to fight back, because God is intensifying the slavery to remind us of who we are. Let's fast forward in history a little bit. In the year 1776, there was a revolution in America, American Revolution. In the American Revolution, our founding fathers wrote a document called the Declaration of Independence. In the Declaration of Independence, there was a statement which was radical. All men are created equal. You know, up until then, this idea of equality in the world did not exist. It was a radical idea that there can be fraternity and equality. And everybody has a right to the pursuit of liberty, pursuit of happiness. All men are created equal. In France, in 1787, there was a revolution called the French Revolution. It was a revolution against the old order. There was a spirit of freedom in the world. You know what accompanied the spirit, by the way? The ghetto. Up till then, Jews had been in ghettos in Europe. That's to say, the Jew in Europe, for the whole time the Jew was in Europe, primarily, were confined to their own ghetto, where they were not allowed to be members of the state. They didn't have rights. They didn't have citizenship. They lived in their own autonomous area, which were usually called ghettos. In 1787, with this whole spirit of freedom in the world, the ghetto came down. Jews entered society, became part of European society. It was a great moment. What was God's plan? God's plan, according to Rabbi Dessler, was that God wanted us to redeem the land of Israel after almost 2,000 years of exile. But to do it, we had to feel ourselves like free people. You can't redeem a country and take on a country and have a national identity if you're coming and living in a ghetto. You have to feel like a free person, a dignified person, a person capable of going back to the land of Israel and having your own government and your own army. So God put a spirit of enlightenment into the world for the Jew, that we should gain a sense of confidence and retake the land of Israel, regain it. If you study history from the year 1787 to the year 1933, approximately 150 years, you study Jewish European history, you see a downtrend in Jewish observance. Many Jews, not all Jews, but many Jews, with this newfound freedom, instead of using it to feel so proud of their Jewishness, used it to want to become more and more like the non-Jew. As long as I have the right to enter society, let me be more like the non-Jew. And if you'll see trends, you'll see in France and Germany, you'll see in Western Europe especially, trends just bringing the Jew down and down and down and down. Now, I'll tell you something. Hillel and Shammai, the great rabbis, Hillel and Shammai, will argue on many things. Well, on one thing they did not argue. If you look into the Talmud, and Avodah Zarah, 36 Amud Aleph, it says that Hillel and Shammai got together in the year going back close to 1900 years ago, and they made certain decrees. These are called the 18 decrees. Some of those decrees you're familiar with. We're not supposed to drink the wine. We're not supposed to eat the oil of the non-Jew, because to eat the oil we might come to eat the bread. Pasakum. If we come to eat the bread, we might come to drink the wine. That's called nesach, yain nesach. If we come to drink the wine, we might come to certain types of socialization, and that will lead to intermarriage. So they made 18 decrees to protect Jewish identity. And you know what they said? If we won't enforce our own decrees, if we abandon these decrees, guess what? The non-Jew will remind us who we are. If we don't enforce who we are, the non-Jew is going to remind us very strongly who we are. Now stay with me. In the year 1933, a party emerged in Germany called the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party was actually composed of, it means two names, National Socialism, which is very interesting. National Socialism. Because there were two false type of ideologies that Jews went after in Europe. One was nationalism, one was socialism, the communism. A party comes called National Socialism. And follow with me. The leader is a man named Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, Yimach Shemo. A man who had no real reason to hate Jews. In fact, his earlier youth, any encounter he had with Jews was only positive. In World War I, he was a corporal. His commander, who actually recommended him for an Iron Cross, was a Jew. He only had positive encounters with Jews. A man of very little talent. He was a painter. Some of it was okay. Sold recently in Germany. He couldn't get a job. He ends up in the house for vagrants in Vienna. He ends up coming to Germany. He gets arrested in Germany for agitation. Spends a short 5 months in jail, where he writes a book called Mein Kampf, My Struggle. Gets released from jail, organizes this party called the Nazi Party. And within a short period of time, he's able to get himself into the Reichstag in the German government. He doesn't have a majority, he only has 37%, but they orchestrate a fire in the Reichstag, a fire in the parliament, and they pretend, or they say that it was the communists who did it, and they cry out that there's a communist takeover. So he convinces Hindenburg, who was the president of Germany, very rational, sensible individual, to give him complete, absolute dictatorial power. Emergency powers. A little nobody, who just a few months before, Hindenburg, who was the president of Germany, says, we have nothing to fear from this little corporal. Within a few months, he is now the most powerful man in Germany. And his party is called the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party in 1933 started legislating racial laws. Laws designed to rid Germany of the Jews. What's the first law that they legislate? The first racial law in 1933?
Jews can't work on Shabbos.
Close. It's forbidden by penal servitude, concentration camp, or hard labor for a Jew to intermarry. First racial law called the Nuremberg Laws, 1933. For intermarriage is forbidden. Now that's very interesting. You know why? Because the intermarriage rate in Germany in 1933, guess what it was? It was over 50%. That's how far the Jew had slid. Over 50%. And not only that, the reform movement, which began in Germany at the turn of the 19th century, one of their leaders, Geiger, had made a declaration. And he said, in 1899, he made a declaration, he said, the Jew no longer needs Jerusalem. Berlin is our new Jerusalem. And the Meshech Chochmah writes in 1910, because of that statement that Berlin is our new Jerusalem, we're going to see a fire from Berlin like we've never seen before. That's in 1910. That's before Hitler was even mentioned, before he was even known. So this man Hitler comes to power, Yamach Shemo, 1933. The first racial law is, guess what, Jews? You cannot intermarry. If you do, you go to jail, you go to concentration camps, they weren't death camps yet, you go to penal servitude. And they had to define what a Jew is. So they had to make charts and documents defining a Jew. Who's a Jew? What's a Jew? And guess what they came up with? In their charts, they look things like this. Defining exactly who a Jew is. And guess what they said? A Jew is not only if you come from someone who has a Jewish mother, you're also a Jew if you come from a Jewish grandmother. And guess what? You might have been so assimilated that you had no connection with Judaism. Your mother was married to a non-Jew. Your grandmother was married to a non-Jew. But as long as your great-grandmother was married to, your great-grandmother was Jewish, you're a Jew. That's how far they went. 3 generations back. So you have somebody say, what do you want from me? My father's a Christian. My father's not Jewish. My grandfather's not Jewish. My great-grandfather is not Jewish. But guess what Hitler said? No, you're a Jew. If your great-grandmother is Jewish, you are a Jew, because we know in Judaism it goes after the mother, matrilineal descent. And they went even further, by the way. They even said if your father is Jewish and your mother's not Jewish, you're still a Jew. It's not true. But that's how much there was such a hatred for the Jew. That was the first law in 1933.
His grandfather was Jewish, no?
Goes by the matrilineal descent, though. But they looked at someone for 2 generations. He said, guy said, look, I'm a German. What do you want from me? I'm not a Jew. It's my great-grandmother. He said, no, you are a Jew. If you're intermarried, you go to jail. Question, you're a thinking Jew. What do you say? Do you say accident, or do you say there's a plan? 1935. To disassociate Jews even further from national life, Jews had to write on any official document, they had to change their names. A man had to add the name Yisrael, and a woman had to add the name Sarah. Very interesting. In Egypt, as the assimilation progressed, what did the sages say? Don't change your name. 2,000 years ago, when Hillel and Shammai made the 18 decrees, and they said, if we're not going to enforce the laws that protect us from assimilating, the non-Jew will remind us. What does the thinking Jew say when in 1935 a law is promulgated from the government that says, guess what, Jews? Your name might be Hilde van Hickensprach, but right now you're Sarah Hilde van Hickensprach. What's the thinking Jew supposed to say? 1937 comes along. Actually, 1939. They say, Jews, you have to start wearing something that identifies you as Jewish. You have to start wearing a yellow armband. We're going to make sure that you don't change your names and you don't change your dress. Because if you were not capable of enforcing your laws, we will enforce them for you. And I'll read you something. In 1935, a Zionist newspaper in Germany made the following comment. Now, this was a newspaper that had no religious agenda. In fact, if anything, it had a non-religious agenda. But it made the following observation. What happened was, actually, on April 1st, 1933, Hitler set up guards in front of Jewish shops to prevent people from purchasing from Jews. They boycotted Jewish stores. What happened? The shops were forced to close on Shabbos, on Shabbat. As a result, you know what the newspaper article says? There were more Jews attending Shabbat services, that Shabbat, than in any time in the recent past. Hitler's boycott of Jewish shops caused the synagogues to be filled. And the Zionist newspaper, not a religious newspaper, makes the following comment. It says, could Hitler be bringing the Jew back to Shabbat? You're a thinking Jew. What do you say? What do you think? What do you feel? We can't intermarry? We have to take on Jewish names? We're not allowed to work on Shabbat, and therefore we end up sitting in the synagogue instead. We start to have to wear Jewish armbands, Jewish dress. Does the thinking Jew say, oh, this is just a coincidence? Or does the thinking Jew say, wait a minute, what happened in Egypt? As we began to assimilate, that's when the slavery intensified. Could this be a response to the fact that we lost sight of what our mission is as Jews? You know, it's very fascinating. Hitler himself, he makes it very clear in his speeches who his enemy is. He's a man who takes power of a civilized country, and he's interviewed in the following article he's interviewed in a newspaper article. Listen to what he says. The Ten Commandments have lost their validity. Conscience is a Jewish invention. It's a blemish, like circumcision. A new age of magic interpretation of the world is coming. Of interpretation in terms of the will and not of the intelligence. There's no such thing as truth, either in the moral or the scientific sense. The struggle for world domination will be fought entirely between Germans and Jews. All else is an illusion. People call me a barbarian. I'm proud to be a barbarian. Conscience is a Jewish invention. It is a blemish like circumcision. You're a thinking Jew observing this. What does Hitler have against circumcision? Well, if you know a little bit of Jewish history, you know, first of all, that the nation Germany is the nation that the Talmud calls Germania, and it's the nation where a nation called Amalek resides. And Amalek is the nation that has one goal, to destroy the Jewish people. One goal. We know the first time we meet Amalek is when we came from Har Sinai, we received the Torah. All of a sudden there's this nation Amalek that crosses the Sinai Peninsula to meet us and to attack us. We weren't invading their land. They only had one agenda, to destroy God's people. And we know Germany is their descendants. And guess what happened? The Torah tells us, the Midrashim tell us, that when Amalek attacked us in the desert after Har Sinai, they killed the weak Jews in the back. And you know what they did? They took the circumcision of the Jew and they threw it up in the air. And they said, God, this is yours. We don't want this. And how interesting it is that Hitler uses the same language. Conscience is a Jewish invention. It's a blemish like circumcision. What does he have against circumcision? Well, what he has against circumcision is the same thing Amalek has against it. The reason Amalek hated circumcision is because what does circumcision mean? It means that we're going to make a brit, a covenant with God at the point of the body which is the most physical. And we're going to say to God that we're going to rule over the physical side of who we are. Physicality doesn't rule us, we rule it. We're going to give up for you. We're going to show that we are in control. The goal of life is to have your soul rule the body, not the body rule you. That's an animal. We're not animals. And what does Hitler say? We're barbarians and we're proud of it. You're a thinking Jew observing this, listening to the speech from Hitler. You know about Amalek. You know about what Amalek stood for, how they hated circumcision. You hear this man get up. He says you can't intermarry. You got to wear Jewish dress. You got to have Jewish names. And I hate your circumcision. And you say what? You say, coincidence. Just a coincidence. People ask me all the time, they say, you know, Rabbi, where was God during the Holocaust? You know what my answer is? Where wasn't God during the Holocaust? God was everywhere. You just have to open your eyes to see it. But the question is, did God have to go so far? Such a strong awakening us to remind us that we're Jews, you know? Did he have to use such force? First of all, my friends, he gave us 150 years to change. 1787 to 1933 was over 150 years. He gave us an opportunity. That's a long time. But we didn't use it. We became more and more assimilated. So finally there was no choice but to bring about a person who will awaken the Jew to the Jew. And it had to be such strong measures. I'm going to give you a parable. I'll give you a mashal. You know, in Hebrew the word mashal means parable. The word mashal, moshel, also means to rule over something. Because sometimes you can only explain an idea is through a parable. The parable rules over the idea. Mashal, Moshel. Think about that. For those who know Hebrew. I'll give you a parable. Mashal. Imagine the following scenario. You have a coworker. The coworker goes out during lunch and comes back drunk. He drunk 5, 6, 7 martinis with his lunch. Comes back woozy and drunk, sits back at his chair. The boss comes up to him and says, listen, that's not appropriate. You can't do that. Get fired. It's not responsible. Okay. I'll do better next time. Falls back in his chair. Imagine the following scenario. A person comes back at his lunch break. He drank 5, 6, 7 martinis. He's woozy. He's floating, and he comes back. He's about to sit down in his chair where he works from. The boss looks, comes running across the room, grabs the guy by the shoulders, flings the guy to the floor, and says, don't you dare sit in that chair. Question. Is that a little bit of an overreaction? Yes? Now, stay with me. Imagine that chair that he was just about to sit in was the pilot seat of a 747 about to carry 500 passengers on a transatlantic flight. Had he sat down in that pilot seat and took off, he would have crashed the plane and killed himself and killed all 500 passengers. Question. Was the reaction of his boss an overreaction or the only reaction? That's what's called a mushal. It's a parable, but it rules the idea. God needs us as a people. He wants so badly that we're going to remember who we are as Jews. And by remembering who we are as Jews and living a life separate from the rest of the world, but in order to bring holiness to the rest of the world, God says that's your purpose. I can't let you destroy yourself. And if you destroy yourself, you'll destroy the world. Without you leading, there's no hope for anybody. Did you know you have such an important vision? And such an important mission? God says, you might have forgotten your mission, but I can't let you forget your mission. Because the world depends on you. I won't allow you to forget that mission. And I want you to be part of that mission because your reward's going to be so great for it. I'm going to fling you out of that chair if I have to, but you're not going to crash that plane and you're not going to destroy yourself. I love you too much for that. And I love the world too much for that. God needs us so badly. I spoke at the other day, just before Pesach, somebody spoke at a certain university. And he was a survivor of the Holocaust. St. John's. A survivor of the Holocaust. And he gave a very, very passionate and moving speech about his experience, what happened to him. He was in the concentration camps, whole bit. And at the end of it, a girl, not Jewish, raised her hand and said, "Can I ask a question?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Could you tell me, based on your experience, what's your relationship with God like as a result of having gone through the death camps?" So I was standing in the back. I was just saying, please, you have 150 people in this room, most of them aren't Jewish. I said, please say the right thing. I was thinking then, but I knew it was going to come out. I just sensed it. He says to the girl, he says, "Don't talk to me about God. I don't want to hear about a God who killed 2 million children. You want to discuss a God like that? I don't want to discuss it. I want nothing to do with God." That's what he said. So after the lecture, a bunch of my students came up to me and he said to me, "Rabbi, we felt so bad for you." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because we know that's not what you believe." And I said, "You're right, it's not what I believe." And they asked me, "What would you tell that man?" So I said, I have to be honest with you. He has a right to be angry at God. He has every right. No question about it. What he experienced and what he went through, he has a right to be angry. And I would not try to give him any information that I would share with you. Because his emotions are involved. If a person's emotions are involved, you're not going to be able to think rationally. But what I'd like to do, I said to them, is the Satmar Rebbe tells us that anyone who went through the war and is still a proud Jew, you should get a blessing from that person. A person who suffered because they were Jewish, for no other reason than they were Jewish. That's why he suffered. Did he do anything wrong? No. He suffered because there was a decree on the Jewish people that God placed. And he went through it, and he's still a proud Jew. Such a person, you should get a blessing from, because that person has a huge reward awaiting him. So I said what I'd like to do, I'd like to go over to him, give him a hug, and get a blessing. That's all I want to do. I'm not going to try to convince him of anything. He has a right to be angry with God. But as God says, listen, scream at me, yell at me, but no, it's me. It's okay to scream at God. Just know it's God you're screaming at. But what does it accomplish? What does it accomplish? What did God accomplish? Was God successful in bringing the Jew back to the Jew?
I think not. I think not so much.
Let me share with you a few ideas, and perhaps we could think otherwise. The Talmud tells us a famous statement. If you meet a Jew, and this Jew does not possess traits of kindness, traits of humility, and traits of mercy, you have to question whether he's Jewish. Part of what it means to be the seed of Abraham means that we have humility, we do acts of kindness, and we have natural mercy. I dare say that as a result of God squeezing the Jew in the most horrendous way imaginable, I can't even use adjectives to describe it. There are no words that describe what happened in this time period. And that's why many Holocaust survivors don't even speak about it. I've come to think, not because they don't want to speak about it, but because they can't speak about it. Words cannot define this experience. And having gone through it, what came out of the Jew? Let me give you a few examples of what came out of the Jew. One of them is a very personal example. I asked my father-in-law, I said, Dad, what happened when you were liberated from the camps? He was in Mauthausen at the end, in Auschwitz to Mauthausen. I said, what happened when you were liberated? So I remember he said that the American army liberated him, and he saw American trucks come into the camp. He saw black soldiers, which was the first time he had ever seen blacks before, growing up in Europe, Czechoslovakia. And I said, well, what happened to the guards who were guarding you? Where did they go? He said, as soon as they saw the Americans coming, they took off the uniforms, put on civilian clothing, and they vanished into the local population. I said, then what happened? He said, the prisoners went out after them. I said, did they find them? Yeah, he said they found them. I said, what happened? He said, they brought them back into the camp. He said the prisoners made 2 lines. They took clubs, and they made these Nazi guards walk through the line, and they beat them to death. And I said to him, did you participate? And he said no. And he said, you know what? It was mostly the non-Jews in the camp who did it. Most Jews did not participate. A Jew can't do that. I said, Dad, this is Mauthausen, 1945. You have every right to pursue justice. You have every right to want revenge. These are murderers. He said back, it's not what a Jew can do. There's a certain mashgiach in Staten Island, Gershon Weiss, has a wonderful book, Holocaust and Jewish Destiny. His roommate in the 1950s went through Auschwitz. He asked his roommate, how did you not lose your faith in the war? His roommate said, I struggled, but when I saw the following episode, I only had a love of God like I never had before. We were in our barracks, and the Nazi came in, and he said that Someone here is a saboteur, has sabotaged the German Reich. What happened? Someone in that particular barrack, had over 100 people, had taken a hammer. Had to take property of the German Reich as sabotage. He said, unless the saboteur confesses, we're going to kill 1 out of every 10 people. Silence. All of a sudden this one little Jew walks forward and he says, I'm the saboteur, I did it. And the Germans, who admire strength and the Aryan physique, they look at this skinny little Jew and they start laughing. You're the saboteur. And this little Jew, he says, my father was a rabbi and I do not lie. And I demand by your German honor that you keep your word. They took him out and they hung him. Later that night, the other members of the barrack were sitting there and they were talking about what they experienced. And they said, as a Jew, they were trying to come to terms, does one person have the right to give their life to save everybody else? And they looked at each other and they said, all we could say is this is the soul of an angel. When this man observed this, he said, I no longer have a question if God exists. You're just going to have to convince me that the Jew isn't an angel, that's all. The Jew is so holy that I have no doubts that this soul is from God. That's what happens when the Jew is squeezed. What comes out is rachamim, it's mercy, it's kindness, it's self-sacrifice for fellow Jews. There's an amazing sefer called Mina Mamakim. It's 8 volumes. And I spent a long time learning it. What happened was in the Kovno ghetto in Lithuania, which was the seat of the greatest yeshivas, some of the greatest yeshivas in Europe, Slobodka, it's my yeshiva. The Nazis came in with the help of the Lithuanians and butchered the Rabbanim and the yeshiva boys. Before they murdered them, they ran them into a ghetto, and the Nazis in their inimical way wanted to keep a record of the Jewish people who they destroyed. So they wanted to keep a Jewish library. So they appointed one of the rabbis, Rabbi Ephraim Ashroy, to be the curator of the Jewish library. He's a great Talmud Chacham. So he had access to the Svarim, to the books. So questions that came to him, he would research and he would answer. And he kept his notes, and after the war he survived. He came back to Kovno in Lithuania, and he published an 8-volume set called Mina Mamakim, from the depths. Some of the most amazing response that you'll ever read in your life. One of the questions was a question that went as follows. A father came to the Devar of Ram, Rav Shapira, Meir Kahana Shapira, who was the chief rabbi of Kovno at the time. And the question was asked to him. This man asked him, he said, my son is on one of the transports. You know, the Germans would want a specific number of Jews to be transported to the death camps. If they want 100, they mean 100. My son, he said, has been taken and put on the train. He's one of the 100. I have a connection with one of the guards, and I can bribe this guard and I can get my son off. But if I pull my son off, they'll put somebody else on. Am I halakhically allowed to rescue my son? So, Devar Avram, Meir Kahana Shapira, he said, please don't ask me this question. I'm not in a psychological frame of mind where I can think clearly, and you can only decide such serious matters when you have a clear head. He said, please do not ask me this question. So this man says to him, is it permitted? He said, please do not ask me to decide this case. Please do not. He said, is it permitted? He said, I'm asking you, I don't want to decide. He said to him, if you're not saying it's permitted, I have to assume it's forbidden. And therefore, I will do nothing to rescue my son. People saw this man later. He had a smile on his face. And they looked at him. He said, why are you smiling? He said, Abraham offered his son Isaac as a sacrifice to God. But he didn't have to do it. I did it. I sacrificed my son for God. That's a Jew. That's a Jew. The questions the Jews were asking are so remarkable. I went through the book, the Sefer. Question, a cow was smuggled into the Kovno ghetto. And they wanted to shecht this cow properly and feed as many Jews as they can. They only had one problem, that they didn't have salt. And they were not allowed to eat the blood of the animal. You need salt to pull out the blood. So what do? So they had a solution. You could roast it. When you roast meat, you can cause the blood to drain out, like we do with liver. The only problem is, if you roast the meat, their stomachs were so shrunken they couldn't absorb it, they couldn't digest it. So that we had to make a soup. But to make a soup, the problem is, if you don't have salt, blood gets absorbed into the soup, it's forbidden. So he gave a solution. Listen to the solution, it's so clever. He said, make sure in every pot of water that you have 60 times the water to the meat. And by doing so, you've nullified the meat to the water. So what they did, they took their time and they shechted this cow, they slaughtered this cow, and they made sure in every pot there was always 60 times the amount of water to meat. And by doing so, they were able to feed this broth to as many as they could and still keep the halacha. Humility. God, I want to do what you want me to do. Not what I want. I want what you want. The Warsaw Ghetto was the Yom HaShoah, which was Monday night, was the anniversary of the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto. That's why they chose the date. Warsaw Ghetto was the first time there was a rebellion against the Nazis in all of occupied Europe. And I'll tell you something, my friends. It was a handful of young Jews. I think nobody was older than 22. Young Jews, maybe about 800, 900 of them, taking on the most powerful army in Europe at that time. Starved in the Warsaw Ghetto for 4 years. Living in underground bunkers, sewers. But still with enough fight to make a last stand against the enemy. After a few weeks, the Germans got an upper hand. And they were able to start finding the bunkers where the Jews were located. And as soon as they found a bunker, they would put poisonous gas in and kill everybody inside. This one Jew, a religious Jew, one of the fighters, he writes in his journal, and his journal survived the war. He said, I see the gas approaching me. I know that according to Jewish law, suicide is forbidden. However, Jewish law does say that if your death is imminent, it's going to happen immediately, and you know it's going to be very painful, you are allowed to take your life to avoid the painful death that's approaching you at that moment. He said, I have 3 bullets left, and I know that I can use them on myself. But then he writes the following. He writes, I choose not to do that. Why? Because he says, Hashem, I want to show that you lost. If your intention was to stop me from loving you, you lost. I suffered for 5 years. And if you wanted to take my love away, you did not succeed. Because I still love you. And I'm going to use the last few moments of my life loving you. And that's what he writes. Did God bring the Jew back to the Jew? You know, my friends, you study the events, you study the Jewish reaction, you study what Hitler was trying to do. The question wasn't where was God? The question was where wasn't God? The Nazis had a special edict. And it could be found, it was distributed to all of the officers in the occupying nation, the countries which they occupied. It was an order that came from Berlin itself. Listen to the order. The order of the German occupation power, October 20th, 1940. The Central Office of the German Security Forces. To all Nazi district governors in occupied Poland. Do not grant exit visas to Jews from the eastern countries, the Ostjuden. Why? Because they have an orthodox Einstellung. They believe that the Torah is true. These Ostjuden will become the Rabbiner und Talmudlehrer. These are the people who are going to be the rabbis and the teachers of the Talmud. And if they survive, the Jew will live. The Nazis themselves understood where the power of Judaism lies. It lies in the rabbis. It lies in the teachers of Talmud. It lies in those who study Torah. We don't know that. Our people don't know that, but the Nazis knew that. You're a thinking Jew observing this. What do you say? Coincidence? Accident? Or God giving a nation the opportunity to bring the Jew back to who he is? And when we came back to who we were, we demonstrated mercy, kindness, compassion. We demonstrated the traits that have made the Jewish people so holy for so many years. So my friends, you know, it's not an easy era to understand. But we have to understand that everything God does is a manifestation of love. Sometimes it's a harsh love. But we understand it's purposeful. And we know it's purposeful, you know it has to be from God. And when you know it's from God, there has to be love. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to see. But I hope I've demonstrated a little bit tonight that there clearly was a plan. And the Jewish response brought out the essence of who the Jew is. And one day, B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to be able to look at this whole tapestry when Mashiach comes, and we're going to see how beautiful it really was. And I believe that with every fiber of my being. And I could say that because I wasn't there. And I would never tell anybody who was there that, unless they wanted to know that. I would tell it if they wanted to hear it, but I wouldn't argue it if they didn't want to hear that. And B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to fulfill the words of King David, the words that we say every time we bench on bread. We say Birchat HaMazon, we say Shir HaMalot. And David HaMelech says, when Mashiach comes, Hayinu kecholmim. We're going to be like, it says Hayinu kecholmim, which means we were like dreamers. What David HaMelech means is, we're going to look back now, and we're going to look at all the things that we didn't understand about God, and we're going to say we were dreamers. That this is the dream right now. And we're going to say, how could we not have seen that it was all part of some magnificent, glorious plan? And I'll tell you something, I believe that. David HaMelech tells me to believe it. But to do it, you have to have emunah. And emunah means trust. Trust means you have to trust God even when you don't understand God. And that's why I always feel when you say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. God, you're one, it's all from you. You know what you do with your hand? You cover your eyes. And I think one of the reasons you cover your eyes is because you have to say, God, even though I know you are one, and everything is from you, I can't understand it all. I'm going to cover my eyes as if to say, I'm in the dark. But if my eyes are covered, I have to use my heart to go beyond my eyes. I have to use my power of trust. and know the Almighty, that the Almighty lets the baby nurse from the mother and allows the exact amount of milk to flow from the mother into the baby's mouth, not too little, not too much, perfectly calibrated to give exactly what the baby needs. I know that everything God does must be based on love and kindness. But my mind can't see it. My heart is going to have to see it. That's called trust. That's called emunah. And understanding this error, that's what we need. But I do hope tonight I've demonstrated even just a little bit that there was a plan. The plan brought back to the Jew to who he was. And what came out was a magnificence which we should all be so proud of. And we should be so proud that we're part of this nation that is capable of such heroic action in the face of such adversity. Thank you for listening tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience.